Hi there, Nikki Does here. Welcome back to another video. This is a PandaPlacer video. We're talking about placing surface mount device parts here that come on tape and reel using a 3D printed and home assembled bamboo AS1 feeder. Now you can see this is very much 3D printed, and there is a hobby servo in the middle, and that's pretty much the only non-3D printed component in there besides some screws and springs and so forth. So let's just go through, and we're going to do this in reverse and go through and figure out how you put this together. And we're going to do it in reverse, meaning we're going to take a fully assembled feeder here that works, and we're going to take one apart, and we'll take a look at how it's constructed and get all the way back to the 3D printed files. So let's see how this goes. We'll try it in reverse. I was thinking it'd be a little easier than starting out with who knows what, and it builds up into a full product. So let's start out, and we're going to do this yummy lemon yellow 8mm feeder right here that is all set up and ready to go, and it's been working great as a feeder, so we will tear into it. Let's get over to a different camera so we can see this from the top view. Probably just a quick intro here. If you're not real familiar with tape and reel parts, this is the cover tape here, if I can get it to behave. Oh, come on. Here we go. So this is the cover tape right here. It's been peeled back, and you can see this is the bottom tape. Let's get a little zoomed in here. Each of these pockets on the left would be where the part sits, and the sprocket holes on the, did I say on the left? Each of these pockets on the right-hand side are where the parts sit, and the sprocket holes on the left are used to drive this tape through whatever feeder machinery that we're talking about. This part here is called the cover tape, and you can see that it was attached to the white paper tape below. And if we peel this back a little further, we'll get, these are capacitors, we'll get another capacitor right there. We can dump that out now. They're not held in there in any way whatsoever. These are called 0603. They're imperial measure 0.060 inch by 0.030 inch in size. So that's the basics of tape and reel. So the feeder is going to have to push this forward the precise amount and peel the cover tape back and present the pocket in the same place every time for the feeder nozzle to come down, swoop in, and suck the part up with its little vacuum nozzle and lift it out of the pocket. So that is the job of this feeder, and the way it will work when it's all loaded up is basically like this. Now I have the cover tape off right now, so let's try to see if we can feed that through with the cover tape on. We're going to go up through the throat of the feeder, which is right here. And it presses up right in this area in here. And it's going to come out of this hold back device right here. There it goes. And then what we'll be doing is peeling the cover tape up off of there and bringing that out the back. So let's see if we can't get that to go all the way through. We're going to need some adjustment here. There we go. And then the best thing is a pair of tweezers. If I can get them out to lift the cover tape up. Here it comes. So I want to take that cover tape up there. So the cover tape is over this blue thing now, and the rest of the tape goes down below. There. Now the cover tape will go over the top like this, and it'll run over the, oops. The cover tape will go over the top like this. It'll run over this springy thing and go right back into this spool holder, and we're not going to do all that right now. But we can see that each time this advances, this pusher device here drives into the holes, the sprocket holes that I mentioned earlier, and pushes forward one time. So that's really the way this is going to work. And then this one keeps it from going back. This is the device that keeps it from backtracking when this slides back. So let's go ahead and take this apart, and we'll do this, as I said, we're going to see how this goes. We'll do this in reverse. These lemony yellow parts are made out of PLA, and the blue, and there's a green one in here too, I just happen to do it. The green one is made out of PETG, which is a little more rigid, a little more springy. Comes back again. There are 6 screws holding the body of this together. There are flathead screws. The intention here is that the entire feeder, I believe it's 12 millimeters wide, but nothing sticks out past that 12 millimeter mark, so that the feeders can be ganged up side by side. You can fit the maximum amount of feeders on your pick and place machine. So after we get the 6 screws off, we'll be able to lift this top cover off, which again is made of PLA. It's printed with this side down on the build plate. And you don't really have to do any supports in here whatsoever. Even these flathead screw holes support themselves as you build them up. If you do put supports on here, either in the words, there's the Bamboo Feeder logo, or in these screw heads, it's kind of a pain. I really don't recommend doing that. I think I did that on one of these, but I really don't recommend it. All right, we'll put that cover part aside. So here's the body of the feeder, and you can see again the cover tape is already loose here. It shouldn't be at this point. So once we get this threaded in, that wouldn't be loose. The tape goes up through this channel. As we saw here, that's where the cover tape separates from the paper tape. This is the anti-return, I suppose you would call it, this blue part up here. And this blue part is the advancer. This is what pushes it forward. When the parts have been removed, they get picked from this little window here. Let's take a look at this feeder to see that. They get picked out of this window right here. That's where they're presented. It's the first moment that the cover tape has been pulled off. So that's where the part would be sitting right after the cover tape, and therefore it's less likely to get jostled out of place. So they get picked right about here. The empty tape then continues down through here, which just dispenses into the center of the PandaPlacer machine, underneath where all the important things happen. A couple other things going on. This space right here is the 20 millimeter by 20 millimeter space where it mounts onto the rail, onto the machine component that it's meant to. This is the advancing mechanism. It's a hobby servo. If you haven't seen them, they're used in model cars, remote control cars, and that sort of thing. This drives a number of parts. There's a servo horn up here, which then pushes this back and forth, and you can see there's a spring return on this. So a spring assist, it pushes forward with spring pressure, and then returning back actually compresses the spring. This part right here drives the tape. This is all one part right here with this one-way kind of tooth sticking out on it, and it can go up and down, so it ratchets. It goes forward in the tape and then kind of pops back over the back of the tape on the return. There's a PETG rigid spring over here that pushes some downward force on the tooth, on the drive tooth. There's another spring back here that we'll talk about in a second. I've mentioned this part already. It's got a few little details to it, but it has also a tooth on it. But this tooth only allows the tape to go forward. It doesn't allow it to come back at all. Also in here, before I move on, there are 2 nuts that are dropped into nut pockets here and here. You can see that my screwdriver is slightly magnetic, so I just prove that the nuts are in the pockets. Here they are. They are M3 nuts. And then this part is the take-up spool for the cover tape. And that spring is supposed to be over the top of there, right there. And you can see a ratchet wheel here, and this, when you factor in this part right here, this keeps the wheel from going backward, and this one drives it forward. So this is part of the same motion as the tape advance here, and it also pushes the cover tape forward. So the cover tape comes down in here, wraps around this way, and each time we advance this servo, the cover tape wheel rolls up a little bit more. So that's the basics of how this thing comes together, and we'll move this set of parts out of the way here. It's always good to leave some extra cover tape on your reels. If you don't, you'll have to tape some fake leader on there, some sort of thin tape on there so that you have a leader that can get you all the way around and wrap into this cover tape take-up spool. So we've already taken off the 6 screws here to take the lid off this feeder. So let's keep going. Probably the simplest thing to do at this point is to take out this feeding mechanism right here, and we can do that quite easily. The first thing we have to do is to take the spring out, and the easiest way to take the spring out is with a flathead screwdriver. Get up here in some of the last coils of the spring, pull it back, and gently release the energy to avoid the ping that's inevitable. This is a bit tricky then. The next thing we're going to do is take the servo out. The right side here of it is easy. The left side is a little tougher. So what I like to do is use a smaller screwdriver than a number 1 Phillips. I like to use something a little smaller. This is a Phillips 0. This screw has a washer head on it, and it comes with the servo in the kit. It comes in a small bag with the servo. So the servo mount screws have the washer head. Now this wire gets in the way, so what we're going to do is unthread the wire from its passageway here, and it goes down the bottom, over, and then back up. So we're going to unthread this wire, and we'll get it out of the way as much as possible, which is kind of impossible. There's a clearance hole here for your screwdriver. We'll get out of the way as much as possible, and we'll zip out this screw also. Okay, we'll put those 2 washer head screws up here. If you lose one of those, you won't get extras. There are no extras in the kits. So that's one that you can obviously make something else work, but it's nice if you don't lose it. Now this servo will lift right out, and so will a bunch of these other parts. We're going to lift this part over a bit, and we'll lift this spring back a bit. This tall flag here is meant to keep the spring from sliding off of this advancing part. I don't know what these parts are called, by the way, so just make up the names as I go. This is one of the sub-assemblies that I build up first. If you're going to do this for real, you're going to be building a lot of these feeders, so it makes sense to get good at building them. So the next thing I would do here in reverse order is to take the blue parts here, the PETG parts, off of the servo horn. So now I'm going to put this aside for a minute because we're going to have to talk quite a bit about this. And we'll do that in a minute. But this thing is then a nice sub-assembly to build. It is 4 total parts, if you don't count the screws. 1, 2, this yoke part, and the cover tape advancer here. So you have the tape advancer, the servo arm, I guess, the yoke, which doesn't do a whole lot of it, just kind of lets this stuff happen, and then this take-up advancer here. So, and this is reverse order exactly how I build it. This advancing arm I put aside, or this arm. This is one of the flathead screws again, which you get a huge bag of those for each 10 kits you're going to build. There's another flathead and yet a third one in here. So I'm going to take this one off. This is 1 part. And then this is 2 more parts with, if you don't include the screw. So there we go. So we'll get to that in just a bit when we go through the fast rebuild of this. So this is that anti-return arm, I suppose you'd call it, and it has a different kind of screw in it. Use the correct screwdriver for that. This one has more of the pan head style than the flat head style. So here's the part first, and that's that anti-return arm right there. This holds the tape nice and flat so it's not bouncing around and jumping your parts over. But this allows the tape to only go forward and not backward. So it runs this way, so the tape, where'd my tape go? Let's cut a little strip of that off here so we can see it. So this tape is allowed to go forward this way, but it can't come back because the tooth shape right there keeps the tape from sliding back much. All right, so that's locked in, and forward is to the next spot, and the next spot, and so and so. So we just took that off the front, and that leaves just the bare, yummy, lemony feeder. Then back here we have the cover tape take-up spool. Let's get a little closer on that. Again, we have one screw up here, and I believe this is supposed to be a pan head. In this one I have a flat head, but it should be a pan head. So let's look at the flat head versus the pan head screws. Far fewer of these pan head screws come in the kit. So there's one that is pan headed. It's got a fairly flat spot underneath, and the top up here is rounded, whereas this flat head is very flat on top, but it has a bevel down below where the head meets the thread. So far I've got 2 of those, and I probably should have had 3. There's the cover for that, and it's got you have to be careful when you print this. This has a step in it, so if you print this side down, it's going to be a mess. This is the side you print down, this flat side. So double check that on your 3D printer plater. All right, this spring is supposed to be back here, which we lifted it over to get the advancing arm out. Then the rest of this stuff just comes off. So, and this one's tight, so it's good that we're taking it apart anyway. This is a little tight. So this is the advance gear. This pawl goes through and pulls it forward like this, one click at a time. And you can see this one is the anti-return. So even if my pawl pushes a little bit, it won't go backward. If this weren't in there, this could potentially go backward, some like that. So this makes sure that the cover tape is always tightening. So the cover tape spool always rotates clockwise. So when you figure you want the cover tape to roll down this slot and wrap up around the cover tape take-up spool in this direction like this, clockwise. So here we are. Kind of fuzzy, kind of stringy, but doesn't really matter. And then once we take this off, which it's kind of stuck on there, not supposed to be that tight. There we go. We're almost down to nothing. We've still got the base, the feeder base, and we still have 2 springs and a screw in there. So let's slide the springs out. They're easy enough, and they have a ball, kind of a cylindrical ball end on it, so they don't slip out. This one does the same. Has a similar ball end on it. And then we have one more thing, another one of those pan head style screws right here. And this is for applying a little pressure on the tape so that the tape isn't bouncing around, and we'll show that when we do some of the adjustment work on it. So let's get the fuzzies off there. Now we're down to the as printed part. And this part also gets printed with this surface down on the build plate. There's a track in here where your servo wire goes, and that's just the right width and depth for your servo wire. I'm printing them with a paint-on support in this area only for this whole part. I only put support in that spot right there. But you can do what you want. I've certainly printed some of these without any support there, and the filament lines do drop into the space a little bit on my printer, at least with my PLA. So that's the end of this part. We do have a few more things that are still assembled. We have something here that's assembled. There's a collar or ring here. That's a single part. That one's really easy to print. Again, the green in this print is all PETG. There's an O-ring here, which the kit comes with absolutely tons of these. So what you do with the O-ring is stretch it around, and there's a bit of a part that sticks out here. So what I do is just put the O-ring on. Actually, the smartest thing to do, well, we're not assembling yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the last thing is this servo with the servo horn, the black servo horn. And the most important thing that you have to do is you have to plug the servo into the feeder controller, get all that working, and the simplest thing to do is to enable the servo with an M610, that's enable all feeders, M611 S1, S is the parameter, so S1 will enable all the servos, and then M611 S1 will actually send them to their home position. So you got to do both of those. The M610 S1 is usually part of your initial connect command on OpenPnP, but the M611 S1 is not something that's normally enabled. That's S611 S1 and S0 will turn the servo off, but remember its position. And that's what you'd want, so you don't have these things just humming, drawing current all day and all night. So if you had 60 or 60 plus feeders on your machine, you don't want 60 feeders drawing 24 volts. So do those two commands, M610 S1 and M611 S1, and the feeder will immediately move to its, or the servo will immediately move to its 0 position, which is 180 degrees. And then we're going to put this servo horn on at 180 degrees. Now, I didn't bring down with me an uncut servo horn, but this is really important that you get this correct. We'll take this one off. Now notice it's already at 180 degrees, so I'm not going to move it. And what you have is a spline output shaft here. And you can probably barely make out the spline. There we go, some splines on there. And then you get a couple, 2 or 3 of these servo horns. One of them has only one protruding part, and you can probably see here that I've cut that off right there. And you cut it off at this, right in the middle of the second hole. And you can use a cutters, I don't recommend it, or you can use a hobby knife like this, and you can score that a little, which is my favorite. You can score this, and then you break it away from the score, and it'll snap right off, right at the hole, which is perfect. Then what I do, this is critical for me, is I take a pointed Phillips head screw like this, and I get it into the, into that, I just dropped it. Pardon me 1 second while I go on a hunt. We're back with the part. So what you need to do is get this hole threaded up, and I'll tell you why. This flathead screw, which you're not going to use for the final mounting, has a point on it, whereas this pan-headed screw here does not have a point. It's like a blunt-ended screw. So the pan-head screw is great for what you're going to use, except it doesn't have it won't start its thread very well. So I take this Phillips screw right here, and I take the servo horn that goes on top, and I just run this in, and when you run it into the hole, you hear it go pop. It'll make a snap noise, and that's when the thread started. And you can see it broke the hole open right there. So that's fine. So now you've got this thing pre-threaded, and I actually, now that I think about it, I cut this first, and then I put it on the servo horn, or the servo rather. So it's as close to 180 degrees as you can get, which might not be perfect. Push it down, and you'll get this very short screw right here with the servo in the servo bag. Let's get a little zoomed out here. And then I mount this one in here. It doesn't have to be crazy tight. Don't strip it to death. But you might turn the servo, and that's okay. So right now the servo just turned. It's no longer 180, but who cares? It already knows where its 0 point is, which is somewhere over here. Doesn't really matter. All right, so now the servos are prepped, and I do all these first. Get them all nice and set up. So I plug them all in, get them all at 0, put all the horns on there after they're cut off. Then I actually go through with this flathead screw and pre-tap that hole. So now we're ready to start building. So let's do the whole build here. So this is, now you can run this in reverse, the disassembly. And the first thing we're going to do really kind of depends on what you're going to do, but my favorite thing is to start by building up this gear system, this take-up spool. I start by pushing the gear of choice into the back of one of these take-up spools, and I orient this tab bump at the top. I grab the O-ring and I hook it on the tab bump. I start stretching it around and I finish. There's a groove in the side for it right there. And then even though you're going to need to undo this later to load your components, I just set that snap, that ring around the outside. These parts right here now can be put aside. We're going to be working with them later. Next, what I'm going to do is pre-build that advancing kind of assembly, and I do that. I've got this part here. Let's get a little closer. I've got this part here with some profile geometry on it, and then I've got a flat side. The flat side goes away with me, the screw away from me. The screw is going to go in from the top. So there's the screw. We'll get it on the screwdriver. I thread it in a little bit, and I'm going to take this part. I call it the yoke, but it's got a V shape in it, and I put those two together. So this advancing thingy goes into the recess inside this yoke, and we're going to screw that in. And we're going to screw that in fairly tight, but not so tight that it doesn't move. So I'm all the way in and then back out a little bit, and this should just kind of flop back and forth. So I'm not having to push on it with hardly any force, and it flops back and forth. It's not really wobbling, but I can do it this way. So there's the yoke with the cover tape advancer on it. Next thing I do is this part right here. And what you need to remember here, if you have any trouble with the orientation, is this pokey tooth has to be facing down, and so does this one. So this is backward. You can either remember you shouldn't see the screw head, or both. I prefer to say the pokey bits face down because both will have to face down in the end anyway. Roll this out like this and it's easier to hold in your human grip. There's a recess in here for a flathead screw. We're going to use a flathead screw. Start driving that one in. It'll find its little happy spot through the hole in here. This is just locking a thing in. It's not really, so I don't think that's even threaded. I think you're doing all the threading work up here. So that again should really flop around nicely. If any of this stuff starts binding much, the servo won't be able to drive it forward. So we have a few more things to do on this assembly. And the next one I do is another flathead screw, yet another flathead, which is here. And that flathead screw is going to go through the assembly you just dealt with, through that hole from the top, and it's going to go into the back hole right here of where the spring goes. Now there's a pocket here for the spring. It looks like a big cavity. And these two are going to be flush like that. So we're going to hold this in here, put it into the hole, get it threaded, finish that up, and here again, snug but not tight. This should be able to flop around pretty easily without being too loose. Next, we're going to get even further with this. We're going to actually mount this one to the servo horn. This is where we're not using one of the flathead screws. This is the panhead screw now. And there's no recess in here for a flathead screw, so it's pretty obvious if you start looking closely. It is flat on there. So we're going to take that screw, take the servo. It makes no difference where the servo arm is. Well, I guess it kind of does. You want it to be toward the back. And it's important to notice that you are going to be putting the screw through on the side that has the recess. It should be totally flat where it's going to hit the servo. So I'm going to line up into that hole and see if I can't get that started. There we go. Same routine as always. It's tight but not super tight. So this can now kind of wiggle around like that, no problem. Everything can move, all degrees of motion. So now that I've got all that stuff done, we're going to place this assembly into the feeder base. The wire goes towards the aft side of that. So this is the nose that goes up inside the machine where the parts come out. This is the take-up spool back here. So the wire is going to go to the aft portion, and this yoky thing goes to the front because there's going to be a spring right there. Notice how these sort of just laid in where they're supposed to. They're all in pretty good shape right there. This is just hanging out right there. That's all fine. Let's put the spring in if I can find it. I had it just a second ago. There it is. So the spring, there's a post printed right in the center of there, so I prefer to put that in, start that on the left. I then take a relatively wide flat blade screwdriver that's as wide as the coils of the spring, and I go near the end of the spring, and I pull this back, and I get it into that pocket, trapping it with my finger. If it doesn't sit nicely, you can try kind of orient it again until it does. It should sit pretty well in there. You know what? I should have had you, before you do that, so disregard what I just did. I made a mistake. Take that one out because we haven't put the servo in there yet. Silly, silly me. All right, this is what I get for not editing my videos. So here's one of those washer head screws. It's got an integral washer on it, and what we're going to do there is take that smaller screwdriver again. We're going to drop the screw in there, take a pair of tweezers, get the screw onto the Phillips head of the driver, and get it up into the hole. And then we'll start to thread that in. Grab the other one and we'll do about the same thing. Now this one, remember the wire is going to be in the way, so we're going to pull the wire back a little bit. We're going to try to get it up into that hole a little bit. Screwdriver goes up through here till it makes into this drive slot, and I don't know, I know the video is not real great right there, but I'm just screwing in the screw. All right. Now we can go put the spring in here. Consider that last one was like a dry run. All right. Keeping control of the spring so it doesn't shoot all over the place, especially right into your eye holes. Put that in there. Okay. Oops, it just did anyway. Okay, so there's the spring. Now we've got two of these plastic springs to put over the top. And again, I've said before, these are PETG. The big arc gull wing looking one goes to the back, and it sits right here. And that bump right there is where it is what keeps it from coming out. So it's going to drop right in there like that. Don't worry if you don't get it all the way in there. It's just got to get started in there. Then we've got this one, and its arc again goes up, kind of up. My spring is not behaving. Okay, so if you don't get it all the way in with something like a flat blade screwdriver or these tweezers, the cover will definitely push that in. So I'm going to push these down just because the spring is, probably should have put the spring in last, by the way. So that's all the way down now. Not real important where it goes, but this is where it lands on the end right here. So it's hard to see the difference between the two materials in here, but this is the spring, and there's the I don't know, advancing pushing rod thing. And that flag up there keeps the spring from falling off the edge. Okay, so that's all that stuff. Now, some stuff you don't want to forget. You don't want to forget to put in the black M3 nuts into the two nut slots. So here's one, and here's two. The other thing we can't forget is we've got to wrap this around one just to shorten up the wire a little bit. We have too much wire. So we're just going to wrap one circle with it, and then we're going to drop the wire connector end through the slot in the back. If that doesn't fit, you'll want to pre-check that, and if it doesn't fit, you'll want to trim that up with your hobby knife. Okay, so it's just going to come out the back like this, and we're going to put this through and forward, but we can do that after we put the top on. Okay, I think I've got everything in that has to be in on the inside. My two black nuts are in there, even though I just flipped it over, so be careful if you're flipping it over, the nuts do fall out. Now we can put this top on. This is the portion that's going to push the springs all the way down in there. So we're lining up over the servo. It should sit nice and flush. If it doesn't, something's wrong. Look for wires pinched and things like that. Flathead screws. As I say, and they won't be this easy to put in the first time. 1, 2. I am actually a screw counter. So if you build stuff, especially engines or things like that, if you count the screws as you're torquing them and tightening them like lug nuts on your wheel, then you have less chance of messing up where you didn't tighten one screw. So if you know I have 6, I know I'm on 5. So there's 5, and I have one more to go, and I'm on 6. 6. Then you don't forget if you tightened all the screws in your assembly. So we have 2 of these pan head screws left and this one flathead. And I think we really should have 3 pan heads left really to do it correctly. So the next thing I'm going to do on here is I'm going to put the take-up spool, which is here, on. And what I'm going to do there first, because I didn't do this last time, I'm going to look for something to kind of clean that out a little bit. See if that works. Just try to, there's probably a better way to do that than my lame way right here, but see if I can just kind of clean that out a little bit. That should roll pretty smoothly on here. Let's see here, there we go. Not really. I'm getting the feeder pawl drive thingy right over the gear, and I got the spring right on top of that feeder pawl drive thingy. This one is also engaged. It's not stuck behind it. It's actually on the drive gear. So continuing on this back, I'm going to use the wrong screw, but the stepped side faces toward the inside of the spool. You put this screw in here. There it is. Then we have 2 screws left, but only one thing to attach. So the first one is this anti-return thing, and it keeps the tape from going backward. And it's adjustable, and you'll have to adjust it. So we'll get that one placed in there. We'll leave this one fairly loose because we're going to be sliding this back and forth anyway. The other one we have is the tape tension to keep thinner tapes like plastic tape rather, from bouncing around. And it goes in this little bitty hole that's right before the pickup window. So we'll set that in there. And we want that flat head in there because you see this gap right here? Watch as I tighten this up. It's going to press down on that and close that gap up. So we can open that one or close it depending on the thickness of the tape. This is relatively thick tape, doesn't need to be closed. Thinner black plastic tape might need to be closed to make that work. This wire should fit really nicely in this channel right here, and then you push the connector through the rectangular slot. You can, and the bamboo guys show you putting double stick tape in there and taping that in. I've actually been quite successful about doing that. So there it is. Let's zoom out a little bit. We'll look at the finished product. Springy springs, tightening screws, all that stuff. Here we go. We've built one bamboo AS1 8mm feeder, and it says 8mm right up there. If we can see it, there it is, barely 0.8 or 80. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. If you found it useful, let me know in the comments. And I would love it if you'd subscribe to my channel. It definitely helps me. I know everybody says that, but it really, really does. And it also makes me interested in making more videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.